Sorry, mau pick ini ya?
Yeah.
Ready now.
Okay, yeah. It's ready now. Okay.
Okay.
All right, let's start. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mita Juristiadini. I'm going to be your moderator today. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of IMSA Sisters to our gathering this morning, in this blessed morning of the 26th day of Shaban. Before we begin, I'd like to invite Sister Anna to start our meeting with a Quran recitation. Go ahead, Anna.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Inshallah, I'm going to read Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 155 until 156 with the translation also. Okay, A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُم مُّصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ راجعون. And the translation is dan kami pasti akan menguji kamu dengan sedikit ketakutan, kelaparan, kekurangan harta, jiwa, dan buah-buahan. Dan sampaikanlah kabar gembira kepada orang-orang yang sabar, yaitu orang-orang yang apabila ditimpa musibah, mereka berkata, Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. Sesungguhnya kami milik Allah dan kepadanya lah kami kembali. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Anna. So our conversation today, this is very important conversation that we're having right now. It is made possible by the dedicated efforts of our sisters in IMSA Sisters. So IMSA Sisters is a sister division as part of Indonesian Muslim Society, IMSA. So the whole idea behind IMSA Sisters is that we are sisters in Islam, learning, serving in passion, and growing together to seek the pleasure of Allah. So within IMSA Sisters, we have the Department of Family Welfare that facilitates this and supports the needs of our sisters and families in the area of health, parenting, as well as women's support. And our topic today is managing spiritual and health and mental wellness during COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure it has been in our mind a lot lately, especially this time around when Ramadan is just right around the corner. When normally we would looking forward to spending Ramadan together with our local communities, but we are living in a different time nonetheless, where our masajid are closed. We won't be able to, have iftar, rather than pray Tarawih together in congregation with our brothers and sisters locally. So there's a feeling that we're being left out. But alhamdulillah, ala kulli hal, may Allah allow us to see Ramadan. Allahumma balighna Ramadan. And I want to thank our speaker today, Sister Menahal Begawala, for taking her time out to be with us, to share her experience, her expertise, her perspectives, her advice with us. So Sister Menahal is a licensed mental health counselor in New York. She grew up in Queens, New York, and completed her graduate education at NYU in general and special education and literacy education. Sister Menahal has also completed a master's in clinical mental health counseling. Her Islamic education includes completion of the Quranic Studies program at the Al-Huda Institute, as well as Arabic Studies in Egypt and various Islamic organizations afterwards. Throughout her travels and studies, Sister Menahal has maintained an active role in the community by teaching classes on various topics related to mental health and wellness through an Islamic lens. She conducts workshops on parenting, wellness, marriage, and addictions, among others. Sister Menahal has received marriage counseling training through the Gottman Institute, world-renowned for its work on marriage stability and divorce prediction. She has also pursued a specialization in treatment of trauma. Currently, Sister Menahal has a private practice for counseling individual, couples, and families. Her current pursuit of knowledge is in the field of integrative nutrition, so that she can continue to work on treating the whole person in her work, both with individuals and with the community. Sister Menahal is passionate about bringing about awareness of mental, emotional, and physical wellness through an Islamic lens to the community. Without further ado, I give the floor to you, Sister Menahal.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakumullahu khairan for the opportunity to be here with you today. Alhamdulillah, I think it's amazing that we're able to come together despite the social limitations that we have to discuss these really, really important topics. Alhamdulillah for us being this close to Ramadan, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow all of us to see Ramadan in the best state of health and spirituality and iman. Ameen. So we'll start with the name of Allah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbana zidna 'ilma. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. So our topic today is managing mental and spiritual wellness during COVID-19. For sure, these are unprecedented times. This is, the circumstances that we are in are unprecedented. And it's definitely something that we have to spend a little bit of time thinking about, spend a little bit of time really figuring out how we're going to manage making the best of this particular situation. So what I want to start out with is understanding the concept of wellness. It's something that's an idea, an area of study that I'm particularly very passionate about, because we think about health and illness generally, and even in the mental health world, when we look at mental health, usually what we're looking at is an absence of mental illness, right? So if someone doesn't have something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or anxiety or depression, clinical anxiety or depression, they're considered okay, they don't need help. But the fact is that wellness goes beyond just being the absence of illness, right? So when we look at wellness, for our, and especially for our talk today, I want to really frame it as it's not just the absence of illness. It's not just like being free of disease, but it is a state of being in good health, of having vitality, of being in a place where growth can happen, right? And as I think about that idea of wellness, there's an ayah of the Quran in Surah Ibrahim, ayah number 24, that comes to mind, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً. Have you not considered how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets forth the parable of a good word? This good word is كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ. It is like a good tree. أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ. the roots of this tree are thabit, they're firm, وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ, and whose branches reach the heaven. And the next ayah goes on to say that this tree, this firmly rooted, firmly grounded tree that stands tall with its branches going into the sky, continues to give fruits and provide benefit in every season. And in this example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us something that we can visualize in terms of wellness. That this tree is, it's, you know, a person of Iman, a person who is grounded in their faith, a person who is not just free of illness, but can stand tall in a healthy way, is like this tree. And so I want us to keep this image in mind, because this is what we have been given as an example. When we take La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, when we take that and we ground it, we root it within ourselves, it gives us the opportunity to be like this tree. Now, currently, generally, but also specifically now, we're living in a time of uncertainty. We're living in a time of, you know, hypervigilance, where we have to be cautious all the time, where there's a lot more fear than usual. And what happens, or what can happen, when we have this constant stress, this constant fear, is that the brain, you know, the part of our brain that's responsible for action, for preparation, for protecting us, that can jump into being active, right? However, if we learn to be firmly rooted, like this tree, then even when there's a storm, there might be a little bit of swaying of the tree, but it still stands tall. It doesn't break and it doesn't crumble. And so I want us to think of that, because during this time, it's normal to be anxious. It's normal to be a little bit out of our, you know, comfort zone, you know, but despite that, we have to learn to stress tolerance. We have to learn to find a calmness, to ground even more deeply into our roots, so that the storm doesn't make us tip over, right? So when we're rooted in our Iman, when we have strategies, and I'm going to talk about some of the strategies to become more firmly rooted, inshallah, right? But when we can do that, then we resist becoming uprooted by external circumstances. The storms are going to come around us all the time. Now it's COVID-19. For some, you know, there are people who go through storms like this all the time. You know, a loved one is ill. You know, someone loses a loved one. Someone goes through a financial crisis. Someone else goes, you know, loses a child. Someone else, you know, finds stress in their job. Someone else, you know, a young person might be struggling in school. We go through stuff all the time. But what we have to do is start paying attention to what is happening right now, rather than, well, what if this or that? Because when we get stuck in if, and we know the Prophet ﷺ told us that if is the word, it invites shaitan, right? And so rather than wondering about what if and how about, you know, I wish this or I wish that, if we just take a moment to see what is right now, what are the circumstances right now? And how do I continue to remain calm and stay in a sense of groundedness despite the circumstances? We know that the Prophet ﷺ went through numerous trials and tribulations in his life. He went through so many circumstances that really challenged him emotionally, mentally, right? But the one thing he never let go of was his connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're familiar with the incident of Ta'if, where the Prophet ﷺ was made to run out of the town. And it was such a distressful moment for him. And yet at the end of that, the dua that he makes is, Allah, if you're not unhappy with me, I'm okay. I'm okay. And so when we ground ourselves root ourselves into our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we learn that through the methodology of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So many du'as, his entire day had du'as. Every action, whether it's going to the restroom, whether it's eating, whether it's greeting somebody, whether it's sneezing, waking up, whatever it is, there's a du'a that goes with it. And so the Prophet ﷺ was connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we can do that, when we can make our roots, our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being our Rabb, when we can make those roots really strong, then the branches of this tree go straight to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes even more, like we can feel it even more. So what we really want to think about is in terms of developing mental and spiritual wellness, given our particular circumstances right now with COVID-19. We want to think about how do we ground ourselves? How do we make our roots nice and deep, both externally and internally, right? In the sense of like physically, in terms of our health, but also internally in terms of our spirituality, in terms of our iman, in terms of our emotions, right? Now, here's the thing, whenever we go through stress, like what we're going through now, it is an opportunity. It provides us with possibility. Because as we all know, as we grow through life, when we learn new skills, when we become stronger physically, so if you're going to the gym, if you're exercising, right? Whenever we do any of these things that bring us to growth, it requires going through some kind of stress. Now, on one side of stress is resilience. On the other side of stress is burnout. Same situation, if handled correctly, if taken in a way that is, going to take one towards growth, it'll lead to resilience. Resilience is the ability to come back, to bounce back after a difficulty. If the same thing is handled in a way that is unhealthy, the other side is burnout, where a person loses their capacity to withstand any kind of challenges. And even what they were already handling, there's a crumbling of that. And so what we really want to look at, if we want to build wellness, we want to look at how do we take this situation that we're in right now, especially with the month of Ramadan coming up. How do we take the situation and utilize it to get better? And wherever we are right now, how do we get a step ahead from that point? And so let's take a look at, what happens when we have stress, right? Let's look at what stress is and what happens to the body. Stress is whenever we're faced with a situation where the need, the demand, and the resources are mismatched. So, I have to do, I have to write 4 papers, and these assignments are all due on Monday, and I only have Saturday or Sunday left to do it. There's going to be a very high level of stress because the need, right, the demand doesn't match the resources. Time is just not enough. And so it's going to cause stress, right? When we are faced with a situation like that, then our nervous system, the part of our brain and our body that's responsible for survival, is going to kick into gear. Our heart rate's going to go faster. Our arteries are going to contract so that our muscles can work more efficiently. Our stomach is going to start contracting, right? Because digestion doesn't matter if you're under that kind of stress. The task at hand, the survival, is what matters, right? So if there's an emergency, that's what it causes stress, then our stomachs will contract, right? Our breathing might become accelerated and shallow. So you might find, I work as a therapist, and I find that a lot of times people who have a lot of stress, they have a hard time breathing, right? So breathing might be really, really shallow. Now, the thing is that when this happens, when our body reacts in this way to something, in general, that can actually be healthy. We need those mechanisms in order for us to overcome challenges. But it is healthy when those challenges are short term. They come and they go. There's a beginning point and an end point, right? So the example that I gave you of writing 4 papers within a 24-hour period, that after that 24-hour period, the stress will stop, right? But now for us with COVID-19, we're in a different type of stressful situation. We're in a situation which is a chronic, ongoing situation. And that's what chronic stress is, right? There's no spacing out of a state of stress and a state of rest, right? So when we're in chronic stress like we are now with our current situation, our body's going to keep pumping out stress hormones, right? We're going to continue to be in the set of, fight or flight. So the question that I want us to address, right, is how do we manage that? How do we shift out of this constantly high stress situation, the state of being that's constantly putting us in a situation where we feel like we're reacting to an emergency, right? And bring ourselves back to a place where we can rest. Because again, if you think about the tree, right, the example of that tree, asluha thabit, these roots are firm, they're strong. How do we utilize our roots, our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to become rooted at a time where it's very easy to feel unsettled, at a time where it's very easy to feel, the uncertainty, to let that uncertainty take us over? The first place to begin with that is our own mindset. So if we think about, in general, as human beings, our brains are wired to look for and to be really vigilant for the negative. It helps us survive. It helps us be prepared for negativity, right? So in a social setting, you might, be like, okay, who doesn't like me? You'll notice the people who don't like you more than the people who do, right? Or if you do a project, then you'll be like, oh yeah, I totally messed up, right? We have a tendency to do that because in some way we feel like it prepares us for the worst. So we're already prepared for rejection. We're already prepared for failure, right? However, being stuck in that state of looking for the negative keeps us in a state of chronic stress. And over time, we'll have effects on our physical well-being, our mental well-being, and it can be quite damaging over time. So we really have to think about intentionally changing our mindset. When it comes to COVID-19 and dealing with everything that's happening in the world, I want you to think about how much of a tendency you have to get stuck to the news or to be, scrolling social media constantly. Because these things can impact what we're taking in. If we're constantly receiving bad news, if we're constantly listening to, the tragedies of how many people are dying, over time, actually, it's going to stress us out, but over time, we're also going to become kind of numb and desensitized to it. So it's not a good idea to overstimulate our nervous system with that information. So in order to shift the mindset, we have to really be cognizant and aware of what we're taking in, right? Limit your intake of social media, limit your intake of the news. Take in what's necessary and leave the rest because it's not helping you, right? It's going to not only suck up your time, but it's also going to give you this constant little hit of stress over time, right? And it might not feel that big, but over time, right? Like just like a drop of water, if it keeps dropping on a rock, on a boulder, eventually it'll make a hole in the boulder, right? Small amounts over time, where it's the same way for our nervous system when it comes to stress, right? So second, once we've started to limit how much we take in of social media, I want you to also think about the reality of us as human beings. How humbling is it that this little microscopic organism could literally bring the entire world to a halt. It's really humbling, and we could choose to be afraid of that. Or we could choose to say, La ilaha illallah, truly Allah is in control. We do not have control. It's our responsibility to take our precautions. It's our responsibility to notice, to do what we can do, and to be intentional about how we respond to situations. But truly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. And so we submit ourselves to Him. Remembering that there is no running away from the qadr of Allah except by running to Allah through our dua. So keeping that in mind and, keeping a hopeful and humble mindset is really helpful in terms of our maintaining our wellness spiritually and mentally. The other piece of mindset, when we talk about mindset and our thoughts, is really being intentional in the thoughts that we engage in. One of the things that we know the Prophet ﷺ used to do a lot before receiving the revelation of the Quran is that he spent long periods of time in silence and solitude, right? And over time that prepared him to receive the Quran. And so being able to sit quietly and just observe our thoughts. It's almost like you're sitting and you're watching what's going on in your mind. Oh yeah, so I'm really worried about, what I should cook tonight. Oh, I'm worried about, my family who lives in this place. I'm worried about my child who's, schooling from home now, right? Whatever the thoughts are, we're like, oh wow, I have a lot of worries, right? And just noticing that. Sitting quietly with yourself for a little bit of time every day. When you can do that, when you can become an observer of your thoughts, then you can also get and gain the ability to notice where these thoughts are coming from. You also gain the power to say, do I want to continue engaging in this line of thinking or do I not? Is this line of thinking, what's it doing for me aside from putting me into more of a stressful situation? Where I start feeling activated or I feel like, oh, I can't do anything and I feel completely helpless and I collapse, right? If you become more intentional, you then have a choice of whether you want to let your thoughts run away with you. When I work with clients in therapy, something that I tell them is I'm just notice the runaway train, because sometimes these thoughts, they just go, 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 go. And it's a very familiar pattern and it just goes and it makes us so upset and makes us feel helpless at the end of it. On the flip side, if we stop and we notice, wow, I'm having all of these thoughts, let me just put a stop for a moment. Let me stop my runaway train. And let me actually think about for a few minutes all of the things that I'm grateful for. If we start nurturing gratitude, being intentional in the thoughts that we want to allow to take up space in our mind, we will be working towards nurturing mental and spiritual wellness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَإِذْ تَأَذَّنَ رَبُّكُمْ, and when your Lord proclaimed, when Allah made a proclamation, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, if you are grateful, if you show gratitude, then certainly I will increase you. And what Allah will increase is left open. Allah's bounds are limitless. وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ, and if you are ungrateful, إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ, then surely my punishment is severe. He doesn't guarantee punishment. He just lets us know that that's, that is the possibility. But if we are grateful, if we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, there's a double emphasis on this. The la and the nun shadda in this word is a double emphasis. For surely I will absolutely increase you. And so it's our choice. Do we want to keep going down the thought of worries and, concerns that really doesn't get us anywhere? Or do we want to actively engage in thinking that Allah has promised us is going to get us to a better place, that He will increase us, give us more. More what? It is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who more would I want to trust with giving me? Right? And so even in the midst of this pandemic, we have an opportunity to show gratitude. We have an opportunity to engage intentionally in thinking about the things that are going well, in thinking about the things, the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Because truly, even for those of us who are in the utmost distress, there is something to be thankful for. At the very end of the day, we have our iman. At the very end of the day, we still have our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we lose everything else and that's all that's left, that too is a blessing. The other side of the coin of shukr is sabr, patience, right? And patience is the ability to continue doing good deeds, the ability to continue stopping ourselves from doing what's wrong, and to have patience when afflicted with a difficulty. These two pieces, these two sides of the same coin, sabr and shukr, should be influencing our deeds. Again, it's an intentional decision. What this means is if we want to nurture wellness into our life, we have to be intentional. And we know this, right? Because every book of hadith, right? All of the major, scholarly works, what do they all start with? The hadith about intention. Meaning we're engaging in this, whether you're waking up for suhoor, whether you're preparing iftar, whether you're reciting Quran, don't make it just an autopilot routine. Think about what you hope to get from it. Engage your body and your heart in this so that you can really, relish the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you can be intentional in your engagement with your worship, its benefits become multiplied. And so being intentional in your ibadah, being intentional in how you're perceiving situations, right? And with this, really being able to increase in your tawakkul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's very easy to get caught up in the sense of not being in control. But the fact is that you and I, inshallah, anyone who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows this tree that stands in this ayah of Surah Ibrahim, if you can visualize that tree, this tree is not in control of the winds. It's not in control of the storms, but it knows that as long as its roots are in the ground, and the more it's nurtured, the deeper the roots get over time. It didn't start out like that. It became that way over time with the proper nourishment, right? The sun and the rain, all of these things. Actually, if storms never happened, this tree would have never grown to be as strong as it is. Because when the storm comes, the tree has a mechanism that says, oh, wow, there's a challenge. I have to build up more of a thicker trunk to withstand this challenge. So without the stress of the storm, that tree could not become as strong as it was. And so we really want to think about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and always has been in control. And what we ask for Allah's help with, and what we intentionally work on, is what we have control in, is how do you and I respond and react to the stressors. When the storm comes, how do we utilize that to strengthen our trunk so that we can continue to stand tall, and not despite, but actually because of the storm, become stronger and taller and more beneficial over time. That's really what we're aiming for. أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. The branches reach the sky. There's an elevation, a connection reaching to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we elevate ourselves? And if we just think about it, the branches of our physical body, right? How do we elevate ourselves but through dua? Reaching out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I've been reminding myself and my family, through all of this, that yes, we have to take the measures and the precautions to take care of our physical health and make sure you're taking your vitamins, make sure that you're, eating foods that boost your immune system. That's all good and well. However, truly protection comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we know that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with giving us remedies, not remedies, but precautions that we can take every single morning and evening, the du'as that the Prophet ﷺ taught us for the morning and the evening every day that are a means of protection. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a means to connect to Him as our source of protection every single day. We have that. We have our own dua as well. Pour your heart out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are you afraid of? What are you stressed out by? Connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that. Use the emotions that are coming up for you, whether it's concern, whether it's fear, whether it's sadness, right? We're losing members of our community. Some people may have lost family members. Some people may have lost their financial earning capability. Some people have lost, their social circle, and that can be really devastating. Whatever it is that you're feeling, use it as a channel to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let your branches reach out to the sky. Another thing, another piece. So that's all mindset, right? I mean, there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of mindset. How we choose to think about and approach the situation, right? That's going to make a huge difference. If we can start channeling our thoughts, our dua, really connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, really being intentional about the thoughts that we engage in, all of these things are going to make a big difference. The other piece that I want us to think about is our boundary setting, right? Especially the month of Ramadan is coming now, right? It's a month where we're supposed to actually be engaging in even more acts of ibadah, strengthening our iman, right? We're supposed to up the ante for ourselves, right? Increase in our good deeds. Now, when it comes to that, it could be very easy to fall into wanting to do everything. For, the person in the home that is normally cooking, you might be wanting to, or maybe your family members want you to cook all of the delicious foods that, we somehow forget about for the rest of the year. In Ramadan, we remember all of the food that we want to eat, right? In the month of fasting, kutiba alaykum as-siyam, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah that the month of the Ramadan is the one in which siyam has been written for you, fasting, staying away from food and drink. We somehow make it, end up making it the month of eating, right? At iftar, where, our tables are full. And alhamdulillah, there's a blessing in being able to have an iftar with your family, to have healthy, nourishing food, but also at the same time, when it comes to the month of Ramadan, and always know what you're able to do. Know where you want to put your energy and make sure that you do it well. You can't do everything for everyone all the time. If Ramadan, you want to make it about your, let's say improving your Quranic recitation. If you want to make Ramadan about including more nawafil prayer into your day. If you want to make Ramadan the month where you make the habit of the morning and evening du'as, firm for yourself. Stick to it. Set some boundaries. It is okay to lovingly and kindly say no to people, even your own children. It's okay to say, you know what, I know that this is, you really want this. And after Ramadan, inshallah, we're going to do it. Right now, I really want to be able to spend time with my Quran. And that means that I won't be able to put so much time in the kitchen. right? If something is beyond your capacity, it's okay to say no lovingly and kindly, right? Again, if you think about that tree, it gives benefits, but it's not giving all the benefits all the time. There are some seasons where it'll give fruit. There are some seasons where, you know, it'll give sap. There are some, it has processes. So know what your capacity is. Know what works for you, what your goals are. And when you know that, then you'll be able to make intentional decisions. Now let's talk a little bit about, I want to shift a little bit. Okay, let's talk a little bit about practical stress management, you know, because we're talking about how to grow. The other piece of that is, in order to grow, we also need to know how to withstand the storm, right? What are some practical tips that you and I can engage in? Real-time tools to manage stress. So one piece, remember with that tree, one piece of it is to be able to grow, but in growth, there's also the storms, and it has to be able to withstand the storm. One of the things, and I want you to try this right now, actually, wherever you're sitting, however you're sitting, I want you to plant yourself into the ground. So if you're sitting with your feet on the floor, just really plant your feet into the floor. If you're sitting cross-legged or on the floor, then really plant your hips into your seat. And I want you to really connect to the physical space that's holding you up, that's supporting you. Think about, and if it helps you to close your eyes, then just close your eyes as well. And I want you to think about that tree. I want you to imagine yourself standing tall. Make your posture nice and tall. Relax your shoulders. And as you connect with the physical space, just notice yourself. Notice the stability of this space that's holding you up. And as you connect with the physical space, and just don't rush to do this, just watch me do it. I'm going to show you what to do, and then you'll follow. You're going to take a double nasal breath, a double nasal inhale, and then you're going to exhale slowly. I'm going to show you how to do that. So your inhale is going to look like this. And your exhale is going to be nice and slow and long. Okay. And notice when I exhale, I'm not going like this. I'm not going. You don't want to tighten anything. You just want to lower. You just want to let go of your jaw. And I'm kind of pushing out from my throat slowly and gently. Okay, so go ahead and try that. Plant yourself, lengthen your spine as you root down through your feet or your hips. Lift up through your chest, through your spine. Feel the opposite pull of being grounded, held by the ground, and being up through your posture. And then go ahead and take a double breath in. And then let it out slowly. And just go ahead and do that. Take that kind of a breath 3 times. Very good. So this, we did 2 things here. These are both things that in the moment, right when you're like, oh my God, right in the moment are very useful to help your brain switch from fight or flight mode into being in a mindful state where you can actually think more rationally. So the 2 things we did here, the first was grounding, right? So again, that image of the tree is just the most beautiful image, right? If you can imagine that tree and be that tree, right? Grounded, connected with your physical space, right? With that elongated spine. So what that's doing is that it's calming if you're overactivated, or if you're in a state of collapse and like helpless, it's actually lifting you out of that. So it's got the polarities, right? So, but connecting with your physical space, where you are, the ground, right? That's called, in therapy language, it's called grounding, right? Or earthing. If you can actually put your feet, connect physically to like the soil, if you can walk on lawn or something, that's really, really healthy. Okay, so that's one piece of it. The other thing that we did was a deep breathing. Breathing deeply automatically activates our relaxation response. This double nasal breath is shown to bring our oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in homeostasis, meaning it automatically kind of balances us out, right? So in the moment response to stress, this is a really, really helpful strategy to manage stress in the moment, right? So let's say, like your child falls and their knee is bleeding, right? Right? You're responding to something that happened immediately. So that's one piece of it. The other side of this is, generally speaking, as a lifestyle, because remember, wellness is not just taking care of an issue right here on the spot right now. It is about actually creating a general way of being that is conducive to wellness, right? So what we want to do is actually create a routine where we can intentionally teach our nervous system how to relax. People who have been through lots of hardships in life, lots of trauma, who have gone through a lot of difficulty, sometimes don't know how to rest, don't know how to relax, right? And so a few different ways to do that is through our dhikr, through our salah, through our recitation of Quran, if we're doing it intentionally. And so in order to be intentional, in order to become more mindful, it's really important that we slow down, okay? And so if you just try the next time you pray, just go a little bit slower. Say the words a little bit slower, change your positions a little bit slower, and just notice the difference that makes. The other way of being mindful is to actually, there's a lot of practices online. You can look up mindfulness meditation on YouTube. A lot will come up, right? So you can engage in practices, 10, 15 minutes of just breathing, right? So just sitting and just following your breath, just being with your breath. If your mind wanders off, come back to the breath, right? So being able to do that, maybe while doing dhikr, right? If you're doing tasbih, that's a really nice way of just bringing the nervous system to rest. The grounding that I talked about, right? Connecting with the part of your body that's being held up by the ground, the stability of the ground that holds you up. What I find amazing in that is if we can really connect to that when we're in sujood. When we have the most amount of limbs or body parts touching the ground compared to any other part of our salah, right? When we have our hands, our feet, and our face, the part of us that encompasses our higher thinking, our rationale, our sight, our faculties, our speech, right? These are the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that put us as human beings above other creation. And when we put all of that to the ground in our lowest possible position, when we connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala physically at our lowest, putting what represents us as human beings on the ground, and we praise Allah, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, glory be to Allah, the highest. What happens is that we are closest and most connected to Allah when we are at our lowest, most grounded. Connect with your sujood. Connect with who you are praising and bowing down to when you're in that state. Use that as a means of coming back to your reality, my reality as human beings. That we are most powerful, most connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we are in our most humble state. Connect with that. Allow yourself to really be present in your sujood. So in terms of teaching in the long term, teaching our body to be in a state of rest, it requires practice over time of observing, of being aware of our internal experience. When you're in sajda and you can connect with that, notice what that experience is like. It might not be amazing the first time, but over time, it has a capacity to help build us. Wellness is not something that's achieved or attained in a day or even a month. Wellness is a process. It requires commitment. It requires consistency. And so if we want to really establish wellness within ourselves, from the micro to the macro, it requires a consistent ongoing effort. There's not like an end game, because wellness also has to be maintained. It's only when we get to Jannah that we don't have to worry about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, whenever he talks about Jannah, وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They will have no fear, nor will they grieve. The place of no grief, no fear, completely worry-free, not having to, maintain the good stuff, that's Jannah. This dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. I have created insan in toil. This is a place of struggle. This is a place of difficulty. That's what this life is. We're not going to get to a place where we can just be like, I made it to wellness. I'm done. No, because just like anything, the cleanliness of your home, if it's not maintained, it's going to get dirty. It requires upkeep. The same thing is true of our iman. The same thing is true of our mental wellness. These things require upkeep, right? Having a bad day, having a bad thought, having a lapse doesn't make us bad. It just means we got to come back onto our practice, right? And so we want to, this process requires self-awareness. It requires knowing ourselves. And I wanted to make this point when it comes to Ramadan, right? Setting goals. Remember, we talked about boundaries. So I want to just kind of make a point about that. When it comes to Ramadan, making goals, whether you're making goals for yourself or your family or your children, you have to have a level of self-awareness. You have to have a level of self-awareness that allows you to know where you are right now and practically what you can do. Practically what's going to be, within your capacity. Okay. And so developing goals that are realistic for you. Being able to know yourself enough and know your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enough so that you can create a next step that is a logical next step. If I struggle to pray my sunnah and if I don't even recite Quran every day, and if I, am not used to fasting, it would be very impractical and possibly even, might I say, foolish for me to say, okay, I'm going to fast. I have to fast, but I'm also going to pray, extra nawafil every single day, and I'm going to recite 3 juz of Quran, and that may not be practical for me, right? Whereas if I'm somebody who, does my sunnahs and is on and off about my Quran, sometimes I recite, sometimes I don't, and normally when I do, I can recite, 10 pages. Then in that case, to push me a little bit, I might say, okay, you know what, I'm going to recite 20 pages because it's possible for me. And I'm going to continue praying my sunnahs, and I'm going to make sure that I include, at least during the day, aside from Tarawih, maybe 2 nafil, right? Know where you are and create a sense of where you can go logically as a next step. So we have to practice muraqabah, right? Being self-aware in our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So being in touch with that, knowing that, you know, I'm going to be as a believer, as a Muslim, I'm going to constantly be between the hope and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And what I want to make clear is that, again, this is a process. Our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wherever it is now, it's going to take it one step at a time. It takes practice, it takes consistency. So even our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for it to build, it's going to take time, okay? But we have to find contentment and being able to find solace in being alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in order to do that, we have to begin to tolerate and actually engage in periods of silence intentionally, not just silence where we're just sitting and we're off in our thoughts. No, intentionally just sitting with the dhikr, sitting in silence, being present with where we are right now. And then when we're engaging in thoughts, to develop a practice of gratitude, and not just, oh, I'm grateful for my family and my health and my home, right? Those are very generic. And I find that, you know, people say that and they're like, yeah, I'm thankful for all these things, but my life is horrible, right? When you think about developing gratitude, think about becoming specific. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you were to count the blessings of Allah, you would not be able to encompass them. So start counting, be specific. Not I'm grateful for my health, yes, but what is it about your health? Well, I'm thankful that my fingers are intact. I'm thankful that I have the capacity to grab things without pain in my joints. I'm thankful that I'm able to walk from one place to another. I'm thankful that I have taste, right? One of the interesting symptoms of COVID-19 is people lose their sense of smell and taste, right? So we don't even realize that we have these blessings until they're gone, right? And so being very specific, move away from the general and get more specific about the things that you're engaged in. This is a great practice to do with your children because we want to start developing a mindset of gratitude, right? And so engaging the mind intentionally, engaging intentionally in practices of both silence and in practices of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with others, right? And then I cannot finish, inshallah, this talk, which is coming to an end, without emphasizing the importance of, when it comes to wellness, we can talk about mental and spiritual wellness, but we cannot do it justice if we don't also recognize that it's tied in to our physical wellness. We talk about stress and relieving stress about the outside, but if we think about that tree, if that tree doesn't receive sunlight and it doesn't receive water and you put soda into its roots, that tree will not grow. That tree will probably die, right? If you garden, you know that the nourishment that you provide to your plants is so important. We have to really start thinking about what we're putting into our body, because stress is not just what happens around us, but stress is also the body, what the body undergoes when it has to digest and process things that are not made for it, that are not good for it. That puts stress on our body, our physical body. And so we have to become more intentional about how we're treating our physical body, whether or not we're putting things into it that are going to nourish it, that are going to provide growth, or whether we're going to be providing stress to our body that's only going to take away from our growth and nourishment, right? At the end of the day, doing these things are not easy. Doing these things are not going to be a one-time, like I did it once and I'm good, right? It's not going to get you a mental high. That might be a nice side effect from it where you start feeling it, but that's going to happen later, right? Maintaining mental and spiritual wellness and strength comes over time. And the reason that we engage in this is so that when we're faced with the storm, we'll become more capable of managing it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ease the situation for all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us resilience. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to be intentional and to work towards our wellness. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the illnesses, ailments, and stresses of what's happening now and everything around it, including financial, physical, and other losses and ailments. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us and grant us Ramadan in the most healthy way, spiritually, mentally, and physically. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Sister Menahal. SubhanAllah, this, your talk here, I took lots of notes here, pages and pages of notes. We started from the Surah Ibrahim about the tree, a tall tree that's rooted down, that can withstand the storms. And you mentioned about the practicality, the tips on stress management, as well as the importance of the physical wellness, the nutrition, and our physicality. So let me see. Okay, before we start with question and answer, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. Let me see. I think we have a question here already. I'm not sure if we have question on the Facebook site, maybe Novi or Anna or someone else, or Maopi, can let us know if there are more questions. But before that, let me mention about IMSA Care. So IMSA is accepting donation through IMSA Care for this, for those who are affected by the COVID-19. So the website is covid-19.imsacare.us. So yeah, please donate to the IMSA Care. All right, so let's start with question from Sister BD. I don't know, can you see the Zoom chat, Sister Menahal?
Yeah, I think I can. Let me actually no. Actually, I cannot.
Okay, so on chat there, she said, "Assalamu alaikum, sisters." Before I said, "Oh, I have a question." So she has, Sister Biddy has a question about obsessive compulsive disorder. She has a tendency towards excessive orderliness, perfectionism, and great attention to detail, which are the qualities needed in her work type. She hasn't visited any mental health doctor yet or therapist, but she would like to know how she could handle this OCD, as you termed that in Islam, what vitamins to take. That's she said she has no problem with the OCD. However, people around her have concern about that. That's I guess that's her question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Jazakumullah khairan for the question. Now with OCD and being scrupulous, very regimented, definitely you may not have a problem with it, and I understand that, but it is possible. And like you mentioned, the people around you may have a problem, right? That's going to be hard on them, because if you're wanting things to be a very particular way, it can create pressure for them. It can create stress for them. That's, might actually be unfair, right? Because if it's too much, when we talk about any kind of diagnosis, there's kind of the normal mid-range, which is a normal level. And then there's the two ends of the spectrum that are, that are a little bit more extreme. And so if you have OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's the type where it's not causing you distress, you still want to think about the wellness of the people around you, right? And if you're recognizing that it is very, you know, that it is actually diagnosable as OCD, and, you know, it may or may not be, because, you know, I know you said you did not go to a mental health professional. You may want to think about how to increase distress tolerance. And that might not be for your own actions. For you, your OCD is one thing. But if you are constantly going around and fixing what, you know, a family member did, or you're constantly, you know, it could, especially for children, it might end up making them feel like, you know, no matter what they do, it's not good enough because mom keeps, you know, correcting it. It can really be harmful for them. So you may need to learn. One of the remedy or one of the treatments for OCD is actually a little bit of exposure therapy. And so small amounts of like allowing something to be, even though you really want to go and like fix it or to adjust it, to allow yourself to learn over time to tolerate that distress. And so you know, if your child or your husband or your family member puts something in a way where you want to go and fix it, don't do that, right? And notice what it's like for you to resist that. So check in and just even say, okay, wow, my heart rate is starting to increase. And, you know, and then talk to that, right? Talk to the OCD and be like, it's sitting right there like that. There's literally nothing wrong with it sitting like that. But, oh my God, I can feel myself. My heart rate is increasing. My stomach is, you know, starting to become knotted. And I have this urge to go fix it, and kind of notice that and allow yourself to have a conversation with the OCD and say, you know, yeah, but there's really nothing wrong with it. And so if you leave it there, nothing will happen. And it's almost like you have to, like a child, teach yourself that it's okay, right? So I know you said that for you, you don't have a problem with it. Fine. So then when it comes to your personal things, go ahead and be particular about it, but start to learn how to tolerate your family members not being as, you know, particular about things as you, because it can really hurt them, as I mentioned, especially children. All right. In terms of vitamins and medication, I'm not a psychiatrist. I am studying nutrition, but that's not something that I can give a recommendation for off the bat like that. You know, definitely not in terms of medication. I know there are some vitamins that have been shown to be helpful, but again, I would need to really sit with an individual before I can give recommendations like that. But in terms of just habit, I would say learn over time, try to allow yourself to experience the discomfort of things not being in the way that you'd like for them to be. And, you know, over time, inshallah, you'll develop more of a tolerance for it, inshallah.
Great, thank you. Any more questions on this side? Maybe on Facebook? I don't have my Facebook open. Let me see. Maybe Sister Anna or Sister Funda can help me with some question.
Assalamualaikum.
Okay, there's another question here. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Go ahead, Anna.
Sister Menahal, I have a question. You know, with all my kids at home, all my kids at home, and then, you know, with it's been more than a month, they're staying at home, you know, and you know, what do you think if they're, you know, screaming, you know, I know they're very stressful at home with the social distancing like this, screaming, or they're what is that, singing with loud voice, and astaghfirullah, I mean, I know it's not allowed, you know, but I just let them do, you know, like singing with loud voice and screaming. I mean, okay, I know they're stressed, so in my mind I feel like, okay, you know, so is it true it's screaming and then singing release, you know, they're stressful? Jazakillah khair.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the question is it true that this is a form of stress management for the children? I think that's what you're
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
asking.
is it true if you're, you're really stressful and then you scream, so it's release your, I don't know,
Yeah,
what do you?
it could, yeah. So I mean, it could be a form of stress management. Sometimes we all just need to scream and let it out. That's, that could be a form of stress management. Yes. It's worth, when your kids are now, again, the circumstances are very new. We're all trying to navigate it. We're all trying to figure out how to deal with this, right? There's a lot going on there. And so if your children, alhamdulillah, if you're able to let them express themselves in this way, that's fine. You also want to think about how you can provide some structure for your children, right? Because they're so used to having structure. They wake up in the morning, they get ready, they have school, they have certain hours. If they're homeschooling, they know what they have to get through. I mean, homeschooling is probably less challenging now because the routine is not that different. But you want to provide some form of structure, right? So you're adjusting to it, they're adjusting to it, also while giving a little bit of grace and saying, none of us are going to have this perfect. This is, because there's no outside, boundaries of like, you have to be here at this time or that time. We're not going anywhere. So it's going to take time. This is a transitionary period. We're getting used to something very, very different. But here's the structure. So sit with your kids and discuss it with them and say, look, wow, whew, sometimes I just want to scream too, when I get really stressed out or when I get like really tired, I just want to, tell them, let them know that you're human too. And, you go through that and what they're feeling is okay. But you know what? We also have to find a way to kind of organize ourselves a little bit, to structure ourselves a little bit. Let's sit together and figure out what's going to work for you. How often do you want to set a break, right? How often do you want to give them snacks? How often, and talk with them. And it's a little bit of negotiating, but it's also going to teach your children that when they're going through a hard time, they don't just let that hard time take over and run with them, right? So maybe in the evening, you're going to have 20 minutes with the whole family. Maybe you could do it with them where you're going to, yell and scream or like do something, sing something with them, whatever it is, right? And it's you participating in it with them will let them know that it's okay to have it, but also that it's healthy to be intentional about it and say, this is our start time, this is our end time, where we're just going to kind of run around, we're going to get our frustration out and we're going to do that. And also, on the flip side, introduce them, show them through your example of being able to just sit in silence, right? So just be able to say, okay, we're just going to breathe. We're going to sit and we're going to breathe. And I want you to just take a few nice deep breaths with me and show it to them just like I showed it to you. And say, just take a few breaths. And when you're done, your challenge is to leave the room really quietly and just stay quiet until all of us are done. And it might be literally 30 seconds. It might be 1 minute, but you're teaching them slowly and gradually to be able to sit in some silence, to be able to notice what that feels like, right? So if that's how they're responding, that's okay. You don't want to shut it down. You want to acknowledge it and ask them. So when you're screaming, how does that feel? What made you know that you need to scream and run around, right? You bring their attention to what they're feeling so that they are not just letting the emotions run away with them. Right? When we ask these kinds of questions, curious questions, then it engages a different part of the brain, right? Where they're actually being able to think about their thinking and they're able to think about their emotions. Usually when we have emotions or we become emotional, right? That has this idea of just our emotions ran away with us. But if we ask questions like, oh, so what was going on? What made you decide that you need to run around and scream and sing? Then you'll engage a different part of their brain where they will start thinking about their own process, whether they were bored or whether they were tired or whether they were stressed. You want to help them put words to it, right? That's going to help develop and build their emotional intelligence. And then you also want to teach them other ways of coping, because as they grow up, they're not going to be able to just run around and start screaming and singing every time they're stressed out. Right? It works okay in the home, but if they do that in public, and especially when they grow up in the classroom, that's not going to work. So you want to also teach them the double breath that I just taught you, a little bit of grounding, right? So So you might say, okay, so next time, let's just try an experiment. It's going to be like a science experiment. When you feel like screaming, instead of screaming, we're going to just become a tree. And we're going to really root down, plant down. We're going to stand up tall, and we're going to take 5 breaths. And we're just going to notice how that feels. And if you want to run around and scream after that, you can, right? So teach them, show them how to do something different also, so that they're developing different ways of coping with whatever feeling is making them want to scream and run around and sing. Okay? Shall I hope that answers the question?
Ya. Entonces, ¿qué akhir, Sister Menahal?
Well, yeah.
All right. Okay, there's another question here. I think someone sent it through WhatsApp. This is about handling anxiety. So Sister Menahal, you already talked about that tool, the technique, the grounding technique. Now, her question is, this is from Susie. She asks, how can we manage our anxiety during this pandemic with all the crazy news? Because sometimes she feels sick when she just got home from outside, from doing grocery or something, and then she got home, she feels stressed out, and is this stress anxiety related to this what we're experiencing right now? Or for myself, I can speak for myself. Yesterday, for example, I went to grocery store and I saw a lot of people in the grocery store, and I was, because I try not to go to the store a lot, but usually if I go in the morning when it's quiet and calm and cleaner. But then last night I had to go, but then it was like a lot of people, and I said, I can't, this is just too much. I mean, like, I'm not going through a meltdown or anything. It's in the back of my mind, it's just, aren't you supposed to be home? Aren't you all supposed to be home? But yeah, how do we handle that situation?
Yeah, so I hope that my entire talk answered that question.
Yes.
But we'll recap some of the things that I mentioned, so that, in particular, kind of using this scenario of, just finding yourself feeling anxious. So number one, when we're feeling anxious about this, right, we have that kind of dichotomy between we do what we can do, and ultimately the outcome is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So we're wearing our protective gear, whether that's gloves and a mask, taking those precautionary measures, and that's very stressful. That's understandable that, it's still doing groceries in a way that we've never ever had to do them before. So it is anxiety provoking, right? So number one, taking our precautions, but again, that mentality of, I'm doing what I can, but ultimately protection is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Making sure that you've recited your du'as, making sure that you have taken, your spiritual measures, right? So that you've recited your du'a for leaving the home, you've recited your du'as for protection, your morning and evening du'as, right? So making sure that that's a part of your routine, because being able to give ourselves in the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's something tremendously calming about that, because we are humbled and, brought to our knees by this virus, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls the virus and he controls us, right? So doing that. And then in terms of the anxiety, some of the strategies that I mentioned in the immediate face of anxiety, you want to be able to do some of that deep breathing that I mentioned. You want to be able to, make sure that you're socially distant and you're, but you're standing if you're having to wait outside on a line, which is what's happening at a lot of grocery stores, right? Taking that double breath. Another very quick way to manage feelings of anxiety is to actually, if you're looking something, what anxiety does, it puts us in fight or flight mode and tunnel vision, right? Because our body's just kind of like, I have to be ready and I have to attack and have to, be like in the zone. And the fact is that that's not the type of enemy that we're facing, right? Where we're going to have to actually fight somebody or something, inshallah. It's more of like this kind of mental, well, it's something small. It's not something that we're actually physically going to fight. And so we want to bring our body to a state of being relaxed and rested. And so one way to do that is like to actually like quite physically, literally just scan, open up your zone of sight, and to actually scan your entire physical surrounding, right? So look at the panoramic view of wherever you are. And so just start with your left and just notice like, okay, I see this, I see that, oh, there's this, and actually name all the things as you kind of look all around. And then just do a scan, a panoramic scan of the space that you're in. And that'll, inshallah, also help your system kind of come back to a resting place, right? Because if you think about it, whenever we think about like a relaxing space or something that's very calming, we think about the beach or the forest or the horizon, something where you have a panoramic view. And so if you actually engage that in terms of your sight in the moment, just look at a panoramic view, that helps to calm the nervous system down as well. So that's in the moment anxiety. And then all the other things that I mentioned of like engaging in a breathing practice, engaging in some mindfulness practice, and go to YouTube, look up mindfulness meditation, maybe 10, 15 minutes, do it every single day, so that over time, your nervous system is going to continue to be in a state of resting and relaxing, and be able to kind of shift out of that fight or flight mode into a rest and relax mode. So engaging in those practices regularly. And then also every time we pray, every time we do tasbih, to actually be very present, to work on being present, that is very calming to our nervous system. It's working in both helping our nervous system calm down, but even more importantly, strengthening our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we do it right. And so that's also, something really important that we want to be very intentional about. All of these things that I talked about are meant for exactly your question. That was a question I was hoping I would be answering for the whole talk today. So everything that I've mentioned is specifically for managing the anxiety and the stress, right, that we face. Wellness is learning how to appropriately and in a healthy manner, manage anxiety. And so that's the whole point of wellness. And so, I hope that was helpful.
Yes, as you said, it takes time to be able to manage all that. So inshallah, we can practice what we learned today from you. I hope that answers the question. Okay, all right. All right, so next, there's another question from Sister Berlian. Her question is how to watch teenager and children from OCD. So is that, hang on, I'm trying to get, what my question is how to watch teenager and children from OCD. So like trying to keep them away from being OCD, I guess. That's the question.
I don't think I understand I see the question, and I don't fully understand it, in that I don't know when you mean watch a child. So if you have a child that you're suspicious might be a little too particular, that might be maybe leaning towards OCD and you're afraid of that, then the first thing is to show empathy to the child. To acknowledge that they're having these urges that might be really, frustrating or difficult, or that are coming, that maybe the child is feeling anxious. So the first thing you always want to do is show empathy to the child, to let the child know that, even if you haven't been through that, and even if you don't fully understand, you do understand what anxiety feels like. You do understand what worry feels like, and that, that you're there for them. You never want to tell a child, just stop, it's not a big deal, because for them, it is a big deal, right? If you think that they are developing OCD, then you may have to, you may also want to consider getting them therapy. Depending on what the OCD is, if it's, just, like hygiene and washing hands or ordering things, it doesn't have to be a Muslim therapist. Of course, that's ideal. Sometimes people have OCD regarding religious issues. So like their wudu and their prayer and this and that, or their iman. I've had cases of people who have OCD regarding religious aspects of their life. And in that case, obviously a Muslim therapist is more appropriate. But if you feel like they're going in that direction, then definitely getting professional help is something that that can be really helpful. I've had clients who have benefited just from therapy, and then some clients who actually needed medication, and that's okay. It's up to, that's something that a professional really, you might have to work with a professional to figure out what's best for your child.
I hope that answered your question, Sister Belian. Jazakallah khair, Sister Menahal. Okay. The next question comes from Sister Winnie from New York. Go ahead, Winnie.
Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me?
Walaikum assalam.
Okay, yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for the talk. There's one thing that came to my mind because you mentioned social media. I find it very hard for myself to discipline myself with social media. Now there's so many, alhamdulillah, like all the scholars, they have many online programs. And sometimes I just want to go to check that or just check news, because you feel cut off from everyone. But then it's very hard for me to discipline myself. I just find myself then just, and I realize this about myself, but I still can't stop it. Once I go on social media, it just draws me, like whatever is out there. So I guess my question is how to stop myself, how to be more disciplined and just be able to. It's always like, okay, I've spent a lot of time, then I'll stop. So once I realize it, but just I tend to just get lost in the news and the information and whatever people's status is, and just at the end of the day, it's like, okay, this was useless. This was useless time, that was just wasted. But yeah. I find myself over and over, repeating that. So if you have any advice, please. Thank you.
Sure. That's a really good question. And for what it's worth, many of us struggle with that.
Hello.
Sorry, were you saying something?
No.
Maybe someone's mic is on. So, that's definitely something that I think all of us or many of us struggle with. I think when the decision to have social media is one where we're kind of accepting that we're asking for this struggle. And I say that being someone who has social media. So, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One of the things that I was giving a talk yesterday, actually, and I was mentioning in that talk that, we're really blessed in that our community leaders are really, really stepping up and providing content for us during this time where we don't have access to the masajid, where we don't have access to live programming. In Ramadan, I'm sure that our community leaders and scholars around the country and around the world are going to be providing content to help us cope with and manage this. Now, what that can do, on one hand, it can be really helpful. And it can be really, providing, like, filling a void that we're all going to be feeling during this time. However, on the flip side, it can also lead to a little bit of overwhelm, right? So an overabundance of information. And I completely understand what you're saying, where it's like, oh, I know this scholar is speaking about this at this time, and that scholar is speaking about that on that time, right? So there's like, or it's like, oh, someone's speaking at some time, I missed this yesterday, let me go check. There's this constant like pull to check, and it starts with good intentions. And I'm not saying that the intentions are bad at any point, but sometimes our good intention can get lost. Like you said, social media is designed to suck us in. So we have to remember that. Just like chips and ice cream, once you start, you can't stop, right? That slogan wasn't made just, we don't continue to overindulge because of that slogan. That slogan was made because these things have been designed for us to keep going with them, right? Social media is the same way. It is designed to do that. So how do we overcome that? Number one, again, this is something that's an ongoing struggle for myself as well. So I'm not going to claim to, that I have a fix-it answer. However, one of the things that I do try to do is that I actually have two phones. I have one for work and one for my personal phone. There are times where I just leave both of my phones in a place where I'm not going to go for a while, and I'm just if I miss calls, and so if it's not there, and especially, as we're trying to spend time with Quran, or like preparing for a talk, or doing some, something that requires attention over time, if I've noticed that if my phones are not near me, initially I'll have like a little bit of an itch, like, oh, I'm so used to just like clicking on it and going on it. But over time, then it's like, okay, well, they're not here and I'm not going to go get up and go get them. And so sometimes just confining our phones to a place, where like, so if we're like in the living room or the kitchen or, family space, and leaving it in the bedroom. I always leave my phone face down. Number one, to maintain privacy, especially if it's my work phone, but also I leave my phone face down, my regular phone too, because there are times where it's just like, if I know if I see text messages, I know if I see these things, it's going to just pull me in. Once the phone is open, I know that it's like, it's like quicksand from there. So that's something that you can try to do, is just have times where you're just going to leave your phone somewhere, right? The other thing is, I know that some phones, I think iPhones, I know that iPhones have this. I don't know if Androids do, but they have like where you can set a screen time limit. So I've had clients who have set, a limit of, let's say, 1 hour on Facebook, right? Or whatever amount of time is appropriate. If you're listening to lectures, then you can create a higher limit. But if you want to keep a 1 hour limit, so there's like some settings. I personally have not played with them, but I know that they've worked really well for people, where you set a limit for that app, and then you have the choice of like extending it. But at least it's going to let you know when you've spent throughout, in a given day, if you spent that much time, it's going to let you know. So it's going to, like bring it to your awareness. When we're sitting on the phone and we're just scrolling things, it's very easy to lose track of time. And here, you're like, oh, I've only spent 5 minutes, and you look and it's been 25 minutes. You're like, whoa, So setting some kind of if your phone has that kind of a setting where you can set like an alert for once you've spent X amount of minutes or hours on a given app, that might be helpful as well. The other thing is, coming back to the amount of content that is being put out right now, be aware of information overload, right? So whether that's news, whether that's keeping in touch with what's going on with everyone, because people are just more on social media more now, but also in terms of like religious programming, right? We don't need to have everything all the time. And the thing is that Ramadan is coming, and it's really, really an opportunity for us to engage differently in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We really want to pay attention to our individual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to online programming, and sometimes that's what drives us, again, it starts with a really good intention, just be aware of, how much programming you want to engage with. Be intentional about it, because if we try to do everything, we're going to really miss out on the sweetness of our individual ibadah. And we might not get that sweetness in the beginning. It might actually be really hard, because remember, the journey to developing a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something gradual and over time. And the more distractions we have, the harder it's going to be. We've become really accustomed as a community to outsourcing our religiosity in Ramadan, to outsourcing our ibadah in Ramadan, right? So we know, okay, the tarawih had the masjid and iftar here, and this social programming there where we're going to have like halaqa and durus and stuff like that, and we become really engaged with that, whether whatever form that takes, right? Whether it's the masjid or at someone's home, right? And that's all good and well. I'm not, there's nothing wrong with that. Ramadan is a communal time. But now we're, it's going to be hard because we're not as connected. But again, in every difficulty, there's also an opportunity. And so be really intentional in how much programming and like lectures you want to engage with. My personal preference is to like pick 1 or 2 that I plan to try my best to stay consistent with. And everything else, if, knowledge it's never ending. And so I don't need to get all the knowledge right now, right? Be really intentional, pick 1 or 2 that you really want to stick with, that really speak to where you are right now and the goals that you are trying to achieve for yourself. That's really going to help you take the next step in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and just do those. And so set an alarm for those. Go on your social media, maybe give yourself like 5 minutes before that, so that when the alert comes up that this lecture has begun, you've done your scrolling up to that point, and then the lecture begins, and then that's it. You don't have a choice to continue, scrolling because the program has started. So give yourself, and maybe, so that might be another thing, is go on, allow yourself, don't try to withhold yourself completely, because the human mind, when we're told we're not allowed to do something, we want to do it even more. But if we say, you know what, I'm going to go on social media, I know that I want to start preparing iftar at, whatever, 4 o'clock, or not 4 o'clock, that's too early now, but, like 7 o'clock or 6:30, you know what, I'll give myself, 15 minutes before that. And give yourself the allowance to go on social media, at a specific time where it's naturally going to have to be bound by a limit. That might be another option as well. For me, what I find the most effective is to just like literally leave my phone somewhere, whether it's in my room, on my nightstand, or, wherever, and just to kind of be without it for a while. And that's really helpful, because once we start with the social media, it's really hard to stop, So I pray that was helpful, inshallah.
Yes, definitely. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. And you're right about that. All the programs, you feel like you want to be on everything.
Yeah. It's,
thank you.
and they're amazing. They're great. They're so helpful. But, it's, we have to recognize that in Surah Maryam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that each one of us is going to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala individually, right? So there is a beautiful communal aspect of this, and some part of it is also wanting to connect with the people that we can't connect with, but also at the same time, we want to be aware that it can be overload, just like the news, just like everything else. Sometimes a drizzle is more impactful than a downpour, right? So even in terms of like our religious learning, a drizzle over time is going to have more of an impact than if we just try to take everything in all at once.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Walaikum.
Bamita, I think there's a question on chat. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I do see a question on the chat. It says how to show empathy to someone who has experience with COVID or losing someone from COVID, what to say and what not to say. So I'll go ahead and answer that question. How do you show empathy? You show empathy by just acknowledging the pain and, saying, I'm here for you. My heart breaks for you. I know this is really tough. What can I do? Can I leave food? If you're in a position where you can leave food for someone who's in that time of difficulty, when someone has lost somebody from COVID, again, it's just such a painful situation. And this this loss is a very different type of loss than like, just like a regular death. Right, this is different because the janaza situation is different. The bathing and the burial, all of that is like such a different situation. And so, you want to just acknowledge that, yeah, this is really hard. And we can't make their pain go away, right? Empathy is just being able to put yourself in someone else's position. And so it's heartbreaking, and I pray that Allah gives you ease, and make dua for them. Let them know that you're thinking about them. Check in on them. So, how are you doing? I know, I know you're going through a lot. So just lots of words of acknowledgement. Don't tell them, oh, inshallah, they're shaheed, don't worry about it, right? Because you don't want to minimize their pain. You can't say, inshallah, there's some solace. I know your heart is broken. There's some solace I hope you find in knowing that, this is from Allah, and, I pray that Allah gives you ease, right? So you don't want to tell them in any way, shape, or form to get over it or not be sad, because it is a situation that will make a person sad. You want to make a lot of dua for them. Let them know that you're making dua for them. And, just check in on them. If you're in a position where you can leave food for them, then go ahead and do that, and stay in touch with them, as best you can. Inshallah.
I'm so sorry. My Wi-Fi connection just got knocked out. All right. I believe that was a question from Sister BD, and I want to say.
So I went ahead and read the next question from Sister Siti in Los Angeles. So I just answered that question. So we're on the next question now that's in the chat, which is about Eid celebrations. Did you want to
Okay.
read the question, sister?
I am on my phone right now, and I'm having difficulties finding the
Sure, I
question.
can read the question. It's not a problem because I can see. Yeah, so the question is, Eid celebration is coming, and for this year, it's going to be very different. Some family members or friends say not to visit each other. How do you deal about this, especially for the children, and make it look like a normal Eid, right? And normal is in quotes, which is understandable. So the first thing I'll say is that I think we have to acknowledge and recognize that it's not a normal Eid. And it's okay to let children know, like, this Eid is going to be really different. It doesn't mean it's bad, right? Because sometimes normal isn't the best thing, right? I mean, normally Eid, yes, Eid celebrations, going to the masjid, praying with the communities, exchanging gifts, eating nice food, like that's all really wonderful. But the fact is that, we're not having a normal Eid. So you're not going to be able to make it look like a normal Eid. Does that mean that it has to be a bad Eid? No, it doesn't mean that, right? So if you're going to be, if we're still going to be socially distancing at that time, it is going to be very difficult. It's going to be tough on the children. So some ideas for that. Number one is to acknowledge, one of the things that we have to, not that we have to, but that's really helpful to do for ourselves, for our children, in terms of the community, is just acknowledging things for what they are, right? So when it comes to your children, start by acknowledging and saying, look, guys, like, yeah, this year is really going to be different. And your emotional state, like if you're like, oh my God, it's going to be so different and I don't know what to do and it's going to be horrible, they're going to feel the same way. But if you say it like, yeah, this year's going to be really different, it's a bit of a challenge, right? Your emotion is contagious. So if you're speaking from a hopeful place, from an optimistic place, they're going to feed on that. If you're speaking from a fearful place and an anxious place, they're going to feed on that. Your tone really, really matters. Keeping your tone soft. If I speak to you like this and I say, yeah, Eid is going to be really different this year, it's going to have a very different effect than if I say, yeah, Eid is going to be so different this year, right? You can just even feel in yourself the difference in my tone. I might have said almost the same exact words. So speak to your children calmly, let them know that Eid is going to look so different and that you still want to make sure that they're able to do something. You might get some whining and like, oh, but it's going to not be fun and this and that. If your kids are used to hearing you complain, or if that's kind of their nature, they complain a lot, that's what you're going to get. And that's okay. Don't get caught up in that. You know, just say, yeah, I know it's going to be, empathize with them. Yeah, it's going to be so different, but I really want to make it fun. What can we do? Let's think of different things that we can do. You might go a little bit more out of your way to wrap gifts with your children. You might, spend some time now decorating your home if that's your thing for Ramadan. You might actually even do a gift exchange with their friends, right? So you might actually wrap gifts and drop them off at their friend's home and then maybe do a Zoom kind of unwrapping of gifts together type of thing, right? You make sure that you do dress up, make sure that you do make it festive, make sure that you do something special, even if it looks different than the normal special, or it is going to look different than the normal special. But Eid clothes, you might, go find a park for them to run around in. Maybe, if your children are old enough and they're into that type of thing, do a photo shoot, like especially teenage girls especially might be into that, maybe not. But do things that are going to be fun for them. You will have to think a little bit more. You're going to have to break out of your perception of what's normal and what maybe was easy. You're going to have to really work on that, but talk to them about it. Help them help you, get suggestions from them. Sometimes kids are really creative and they might have some ideas of things that you can do. If they think of something crazy, don't just say no. Start with like, wow, that would be so fun. So acknowledge their things. Don't ever just shoot them down and be like, oh, no way, that's too crazy. Don't do that. Start by saying, whoa, that would be a really fun thing to do. Right now, that also might be kind of tough. Or can we find another way to do that that won't be as difficult, right? Or that might be a little bit easier for our family. Engage them in a conversation. Let them get their creative juices flowing. That way you'll also know what's important to your children, right? Make sure that you don't think of this as a burden. It might be a burden, but don't let that part of your mind overtake the conversation that you're having with your children. So have a conversation with them, try your best to make it festive differently than you normally would do, right? It's not normal. We just start with that. It's not a normal Eid, right? So inshallah, hopefully that was helpful.
Jazakallah khair. Oh wait, right. Okay, all right. I think I believe there was another question, but I think I lost it over here.
That's okay.
So
I can read it, sister. I can read it because I can see the question.
Okay, thank
so I'll
you.
go ahead and, no problem. So it says, I apologize if this has been discussed earlier. And so your question, sister, I didn't specifically address this, but there are ways of how to deal with the anxiety. But what are the signs that you have anxiety from this situation? Is it always mentally? Can it be physically, such as headaches or other symptoms? And I'm really glad you asked that question, actually, because I did not mention this. The anxiety from this situation can absolutely manifest in a physical manner. So you might have headaches, you might be experiencing fatigue, you might be experiencing insomnia, sleeplessness, whether that's a difficulty falling asleep at night or difficulty staying asleep at night. You might find yourself feeling more agitated. You might start having psychosomatic symptoms. So like where you have a cough, or, you feel like you have a little bit of a fever and it's not COVID, but it's like the stress of having COVID might start inducing some psychosomatic symptoms. So definitely anxiety can manifest in a physical manner. The way that, if it's anything, if you've started experiencing things that are new, that started with this whole pandemic, then there's a very good likelihood that it is anxiety kicking in, so definitely treat it as that. Recognize, again, start with doing what I've told you this already, and I'm going to repeat it again. Start with recognizing it for what it is. Like, this is different. I know personally, alhamdulillah, I think I'm pretty good at managing anxiety. I've never had an issue with sleep. But I know personally, for the past few weeks, I have really struggled with my sleep, whether it's falling asleep or staying asleep. It's been really tough. And, so now the steps to that I personally took was, number one, recognizing like, wow, this is really, when it was happening for over a week straight, I said, okay, there's something going on here. I don't think I'm anxious, but my body's clearly holding on to something, right? Because I'm not thinking about it. I don't watch the news that much, just here and there, little bits and pieces. So I do things that I know are going to be helpful, but still my body's clearly holding on to something. There's some concern there. Even when it comes to getting ill, I'm kind of like, alhamdulillah, I take care of my health. If I'm meant to get sick, then I'll get sick, and I pray, I make my du'as to not get sick. And, so I'm not even like mentally, I'm not anxious where I'm like worried about COVID, there are parts of it, the effects of it, the big picture that I am concerned about, of course, the effect on the community, the financial ramifications for individuals, but the community at large, the masajid, stuff like that. Yeah, so I do have those concerns, but nonetheless, it's acknowledging it for what it is. I had to tell myself, like, look, I don't normally have anxiety, but this is a situation that's clearly affecting me in some way. And so what I started doing was just, being more aware of that. I started, looking into more sleep hygiene practices. So, in terms of like also supplementation, there's some supplements and vitamins that we might be deficient in. For example, magnesium is one of them. So there's, I supplement with magnesium glycinate. That's our natural calming mechanism in the body. So finding things that are going to help my sleep hygiene, making sure that the lights are dim in the evening, doing a relaxation exercise before bed, right? So these are things that I've personally have had to implement since I noticed that my sleep was affected, right? So there are other things that might happen. Again, if you're lethargic, if you're feeling like a lack of motivation, you know, you might have to force yourself to get up and go outside, get some sun. It's been in New York, I know it's been like on and off rainy and gloomy today. Alhamdulillah, there's some sun, but it's been pretty cold, which is, it's April. It's not really supposed to be this cold. But go outside, go for a walk, especially if it's sunny, get yourself some fresh sunlight, try your best to, you know, get sunlight in the morning. That's going to help with your, you know, your natural circadian rhythm, getting your body kind of acclimated. So doing things that are, you know, that show your body that you're taking care of it, and your mind, right? So doing some relaxation, which can be in the form of some deep breathing, like we discussed earlier. It could be in the form of sitting and just doing dhikr. It could be in the form of taking a walk and getting some exercise. It could be in the form of going to YouTube and pulling up a mindfulness meditation video and following that. There's something called Yoga Nidra, which is Nidra. That's just basically laying down and bringing awareness to different parts of the body. That can be very relaxing. So, you know, finding ways to help your nervous system relax and just kind of calm down, inshallah will help. But yes, absolutely, you can have the mental symptoms of anxiety, but also the physical as well. So, and just to make sure that you're taking care of your health, you're staying hydrated, you're eating nutritious food. It's even more important now as our body, you know, copes with this external stress to be feeding our bodies things that are going to strengthen it from the inside out. Okay.
All right, Jazakallah khair. I guess the next one, I know it's another should be another lecture on this, but this is regarding the that we're staying in order right now, staying in place order, and I guess there's a domestic violence cases are on the rise right now. If you could address that, and before we close this session today, Sister Menahal.
So we left the hardest question for last, huh?
I know, right?
So when it comes to, you know, there's a couple of different things, right? There's marriage. Generally, marriages are going to face their own strain during this time. But then there's also issues with domestic violence. And in that case, I think that resources for help are still there. I really, honestly, I don't think I'm fully equipped to address the issue of domestic violence, right? Because it's just not an area of specialty for me in terms of, like, I know that there are resources out there, you know, and my heart really goes out to anyone that's a victim to this right now, because you know, it's like you're trapped with the person who's hurting you and harming you, right? So it's really, really difficult. And I honestly don't really have a good answer for this, you know. I know that the resources are still there. You know, you can still, if you're faced with a domestic violence charge, you can still call the police, get an order of protection, and then the abuser would have to leave the home and not, you know, come in proximity of the victim. And you could definitely go that route. So that resource is still there. There's no reason for anyone to have to put up with domestic violence at all. So I would look into women's shelters, you know, the possibility of calling the police, because if you're trapped in the home with this person, it's going to create an increase in the domestic violence. And so I know that it's really scary to take a step like calling the police or, you know, escaping to a women's shelter, but that if your life and your child's life depends on it, it might be worth it. Okay. And just there's a question, Yoga Nidra, is that spelling right? Yes, that is the correct spelling.
Yeah.
But just be aware of that with these practices when they're on YouTube. There are some that have a little bit of a spiritual element, and you want to avoid those. There are some that are literally just like saying, okay, breathe in, breathe out, bring awareness to, you know, this part of your body. Those are the ones that are really helpful. You know, so just be aware of that when you're looking for this.
Great. All right. It's 11:57 here, and I would like to honor your time, Sister Menahal. We really enjoy. We really learn a lot from your talk, and we really appreciate your time. I guess if you for like 30 seconds, if you have something like the last words to say to us that we can put into practice on top of what you have spoken about
Sure.
before we close.
Yeah, absolutely. Just remember at the end of the day that stress and calm are both highly contagious. So choose wisely which one you're going to go with, right? You cannot change or control what's happening, but you can choose your reaction to it. So make sure, especially when you're interacting with your children, keep your calm through your tone of voice. Think about whatever information you're taking in. Is it helping your calmness or is it feeding your stress, right? And at the end of the day, think about your mindset and develop a mindset of adaptation, that I'm going to adapt to this. I'm going to do my best with this rather than, oh my God, I'm going to fight this and I have to, I have to make sure that it doesn't get me, right? So choose a mindset of adaptation rather than I will fight this. Inshallah. And I ask, if there's anything that has been beneficial, it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if there is anything that was said incorrectly, that is no fault but my own. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings us benefit both through this lecture and in the month of Ramadan. For all of us, Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jazakallah khairan katsira, Sister Menahal. And yes, I would like to thank you again and just pray that everyone is staying well and fine and healthy throughout this, and hopefully we see each other again on the other side. And I pray that Allah bless our gathering today and allow us to see Ramadan in a few days, inshallah. And I would like to close with the dua. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus solihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Jazakillah khair, Mbak Mita.
Baik.